One night when I was in high school, maybe even middle school, I was working in the study when my mother came in and asked me whether I'd been playing the piano. Only the two of us were home. My father and sister were both out. I did often play the piano in the music room, really just a hallway, adjacent to the study. Or listen to classical music while I worked. Or I hadn't been that night. Or said so. Mom appeared to me to be weirded out. I could have sworn I heard piano music, she said, with that amused/embarrassed/wary effect people exhibit in the presence of the uncanny. Maybe a radio had been left on, we speculated, playing at near subliminal volume. I helped her search the house, looking for the source of this alleged music, but we found nothing. Mom was so adamant about what she'd heard that it became a family story, one of our go-to anecdotes when we'd gang up on and make fun of each other. The night Mom thought she heard piano music, Mom always told this as a ghost story. She believed the 200-year-old stone farmhouse where we grew up was haunted. Mom lived on there for decades after my sister and I had left home and our father had died. And she told us she heard strange things there sometimes. There are more obvious, less interesting explanations for noises in a 200-year-old farmhouse than a haunting, of course. But Mom was insistent that these weren't the normal creaks and scuttles of a house settling, or mice in the walls. She sensed presences there, not always friendly ones, she said. She looked up the property records and learned that no one had ever lived there for longer than 40 years. The house didn't get passed down within families. She thought people got spooked there. Recently my mother asked me, "Do you think it's possible to have memories of the future?" I surprised myself by immediately answering, "Yes, I do." I was thinking not of woo-woo superstitions like precognition but of some of the science fiction classics of my adolescence, in which time is trickier than humans' linear perception allows. It's not just the visionary wackos who make for good SF writers who are skeptical about time's stolidity. Albert Einstein said that past, present, and future are only a stubbornly persistent illusion. When I read Mom this quote, she asked me to write it down for her. Time has been much on Mom's mind lately, partly because time is a little slipperier for her than it used to be. She conflates generations, confusing my sister with her sister, who's deceased. She exclaims how long it's been since I last visited. Though I was there just last week, I've been reading her Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, a novel much preoccupied with time. She first read this book when she was a teenager, and decided then that it would be a good book to reread at the other end of her life, which she's evidently judged this to be. It's set in a TB sanitarium in the Alps, a place outside the normal, workaday calendar, where time is more elastic, not unlike the retirement community, where the stage of life she now inhabits. Human beings do have one extra sense: we are, so far as we know, the only animal cursed with foreknowledge. Reality is a more explicitly consensual enterprise in the retirement home than on the outside. The senses are unreliable, memories failing, and cognitive problems common. My mother often sees people who aren't there, or, let us say, people I do not see, and conflates authentic memories with dreams and imagination. But she was a nurse or a teacher of nursing her whole career, so she also knows that these are symptoms of her diagnosis. She accepts that I don't see all the same people she does, and takes my word for it when I tell her that I have not in fact come out as gay and been killed. Sometimes I also have to make ontological compromises. I was initially doubtful of Mom's claim to have seen a horse jump off a high dive in Atlantic City, but it proved to be perfectly true. When she asked me to place a slice of pizza on a plate in front of the man sitting in the black chair, I obliged. I wasn't going to be rude to a guest just because he didn't, in my opinion, exist. It only occurred to me after I left the retirement home that I had a mental image of the man in the chair, tall, slim, silver-haired, dressed in a dark suit. So in a sense, I saw him now too. A couple of years after I'd graduated college, my father was dying in what had been my old bedroom upstairs. Because my mother was a nurse, he was, relatively, fortunate in getting to die at home, surrounded by family, instead of in a hospital, attended by strangers. Sometime in the last week that he was still lucid, he asked my mother who had been playing the piano downstairs. Mom thought, "I told you so." It's an old belief that the veil of reality grows thinner, more permeable, at either end of life, near birth and death, just as it's said to around this time of year, on the cusp between summer and winter, at All Hallows' Eve and the Day of the Dead. Cartoonist Linda Berry says that, watching a child play with an imaginary friend or inanimate object, it's hard to avoid the impression that something is playing back with them. And I can't deny that I am crept out when Mom holds a conversation with a little girl she says is sitting at the foot of her bed. That story about Dad hearing the piano music on his deathbed gives me the kind of cozy shivers that good ghost stories do, spooky on the surface, but deep down, comforting. Stephen King likes to recount a conversation he had with Stanley Kubrick during his adaptation of The Shining. King, then still a drinker, was hungover, in the middle of shaving. One eye open, when his wife appeared in the bathroom door, looking like she'd seen a ghost, to tell him someone claiming to be Stanley Kubrick was on the phone. Pretty much the first thing the great director said when he got the hungover author on the horn was, "Isn't a ghost story fundamentally optimistic?" King was like, how do you figure? Kubrick, an arch rationalist, argued that the genre inherently assumes that there is at least something beyond the grave, so wasn't it essentially comforting? King, who is ultimately a religious writer, thought it over and asked, "But what about hell?" It was effectively their last pre-production discussion. We all remember the future, we haunt ourselves. Me, I'm torn between the King and Kubrick sensibilities. The veneer of rationality is pretty thin in all of us, as Shirley Jackson writes in The Haunting of Hill House. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. I'd like to believe we get glimpses of a reality behind this one. Even though it would terrify me, I would love to see my father's ghost, or Bigfoot, or a UFO, anything to suggest there's more going on in this world than this dreary human bullshit. But like Stanley Kubrick, I am a boring materialist. I have a glum faith that our sensory apparatus, when it's functioning correctly, is pretty well designed to get us through the day. I'm afraid sensitives, attuned to the spirit world, are either credulous self-deceivers or charlatans. It's true that there are more things in heaven and earth than we evolved to perceive. But it's not as if, but we're children, we can see in UV or hear 30 kHz and later forget how, or, in our senescence, develop the ability to detect magnetic fields or poke a toe into the 12th dimension. People stop believing in Santa and monsters and have crises of faith in adolescence not because they've become cut off from some primal connection to the magical, or divine, but because they learn to distinguish between reality and make-believe, but develop critical thinking skills. And I believe that as we age our brains begin to malfunction, eventually stop working. And then we're gone. But this is a horror story no one wants to hear. Shortly after she moved into the retirement community, my mother started hearing music, so faint she had to strain to hear it. At first she thought it was a chorus or barbershop quartet rehearsing. She asked me whether I thought they might be piping in music to the old folks' home at low volume, to pacify the residents. I thought probably not. I was too tactful to point out that auditory hallucinations are a symptom of Parkinson's. But Mom didn't need me to. She was more amused than offended, but she still hears the music. This, it turns out, is why she asked me whether I believed in memories of the future. "Do you remember that night when I thought I heard music at the farm?" she asked. I said of course I did. She said, "I think that was the same music." When I told this story to a novelist, who's writing a book whose narrator is either suffering from dementia or seeing supernatural phenomena, she said that one advantage of fiction over non is that stories are just more fun than the truth. You don't tell a ghost story to convey information, but for the same reason you tell a joke, to evoke an involuntary response, to give someone a feeling, like tickling or startling them, to prod the irrational animal under the civilized surface, make it twitch and squirm, flesh it out of hiding. I would much rather have been a science fiction or fantasy writer than an essayist, but either out of some perverse streak of killjoy honesty or just cause I'm bad at making stuff up, I am stuck with the drab materials of fact. There is a different version of this essay to be written, by a more sentimental or credulous writer, that has a happy ending. Its last line, so insipid I can barely stand to type it, goes something like, and sometimes, if I listen carefully, I can hear the music too. But the truth is I can't. If I'm not suffering from auditory hallucinations. But whether we hear the music or not, eventually we all have to face it. This is the unfaceable fact we have to mask with Halloween costumes, disguised as ghosts, vampires, zombies, even slashers are more fun than Parkinson's. Human beings do have a form of precognition. We are, so far as we know, the only animal cursed with foreknowledge. We know our senses will fade, our memories dissolve, ourselves disappear into thin air. We all remember the future, we haunt ourselves. The ghost in every ghost story is you.